Classical Greco-Roman mythology posited that the Moirai, or the Fates, were three sisters who determined the course of a human life through knitting. Clotho was the spinner. Lachesis measured each thread, and Atropos cut the thread at the end of a person's life. By weaving this yarn for each individual and cutting it at the end of their life, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos controlled life and death within that thread, and therefore time was infused into that yarn, and so was a narrative. The Roman Empire dealt with its own share of people seeking asylum during the 4th century. Around 364 AD, King Fritigern of the Goths sought to enter Rome with his people. Unfortunately, the Roman Empire did not have enough border guards, which led to a massive influx of Gothic migrants. In fact, the phenomenon of Gothic people migrating to Rome was significant enough that the word asylum is derived from Latin. Initially, fugitives could seek asylum by supplicating to the statues of Roman gods, Caesar, or those of Roman emperors. Sometimes, if they had them, condemned Roman criminals could ask their influential friends to voice support for them in a legal proceeding. These laws were all rooted in Christian ideals of right and wrong, or legislative traditions, or even ideas of piety. For instance, in 432 AD, an edict of the Theodosian Code, which was the set of principles at the time, read, "Any slave who seeks out a church without any weapon will not be sent away before 1 day has passed." Even despite this lack of general violence, the Gothic refugees were still seen as outsiders to the Roman Empire and were quite literally forced to assimilate as their only recourse from persecution. Today, many politicians are using this physical Roman lenience as an argument against immigration towards the United States. For example, in 2006, Republican Congressman Ted Poe warned, "What started out as a controlled entry mushroomed into a massive influx. Several hundreds of thousands came across to the Roman Empire. But the Goths did not take the oath to support the emperor. They did not assimilate. They did not become Roman. And a few years later, the state within a state revolted and internal war started." Arguments like Senator Poe's continuously mistake correlation for causation, which further fuels the self-perpetuating fire of inflammatory anti-immigration rhetoric. The truth is that Rome fell for many reasons. There were financial issues due to excessive spending on circuses and games. Locals were infused into the Roman army and weakened the might of it, and so on. And maybe excessive immigration did play a role, but it is ignorant to say that it was the only reason for Rome's fall. Overall, the United States and the Roman Empire draw comparisons due to elements that are prevalent in both states, such as large military spending, arrogance and materialism, overall worldwide influence, etc. However, these states are clearly not the same. Just look at how different the clothes are from these time periods. Tunics and togas, which were made from white wool or linen, are vastly different from the various blends of modern clothing. Full-scale comparisons like this are irresponsible and don't consider the whole story. whether they miss out on refugees' mental toll of being seen as an outsider and being forced to sacrifice elements of your culture, or whether they attribute too much negative power to one event. It is clear that this story of migration has the same essence of woven fabric, but has its own color.
We always seem to talk about the next thing we're going to eat while we're eating.
Yeah, so we're deciding if we eat Monsters today,
Or Eagle Rock.
or Eagle Rock, Dan Daniels at Joy,
Ah, Mr. Ford. Splendid seeing you, sir. What captures your fancy? This lad is very brawny, yeah?
How much are the ones, Platt and Eliza?
Ah, yes. 1,000 for Platt. Oh, this is a nigger of considerable talent, I assure you. 700 for Eliza? My fairest price?
You will accept a note?
Please,
of course,
sir,
from you, Mr.
do not
Ford.
divide my family. Do not take me unless you take my children.
Eliza, quiet!
You will have the most faithful slave of me, the most
Liza.
faithful slave that's ever lived, but I beg that you
Your
do
price
not
for the boy.
separate
Yes, the boy.
us. Please.
Stop it. I will give you something to cry about. Randall, come forward. Come. Now, you see how fit this boy is. Hmm? Like ripe fruit. May I take your stick for a moment? Observe this, Randall. Jump, run. Very good. Higher. You see this? Very likely. He will grow into a fine beast. 600 for the boy. Fair and final.
Done.
Superb. A moment, please. Mr. Ford.
Please.
Eliza.
How much for the little girl? If you have no use for her, one so young will bring you no profit.
No. I cannot sell the girl. No, there's heaps and piles of money to be made from her. She's a beauty, one of the regular bloods. None of your thick-lipped, bullet-headed, cotton-picking niggers here.
A child, man. For God's sake, you're not sentimental in the least.
My sentimentality extends the length of a coin. Now, do you take this lot, Mr. Ford, or do you pass on them all?
Please.
I will take the ones, Platt and Eliza.
Sold, Eliza and Platt. Splendid.
You will not take them from me.
Get her out.
Through the blatant disregard for familial separation, nonchalant bartering of human lives, violence towards slaves, and even the inequality between white suits and slave Osnaburg, the American slave trade made sure to knit the idea that black people were subhuman into the fabric of migration.
little nervous this morning? See? Do you understand what these proceedings here in court are all about? You know what a lawyer is? No? Do you have a lawyer? No?
Questions 35 and 36. Any problems with the government in your home country? If so, what happened? My government? Write this down in your notebook. They don't do shit for anybody like me. That's the problem. It's then that, from his pocket, he pulls out a piece of paper that haunted me for so long. A copy of the police report he filed against the gang. He filed it months before his friend was killed, but the police never did anything. And Manu knew, because everyone knows this is how it is, that the police wouldn't do anything to prevent a second incident, or a third. That night, after the confrontation with the gang, he called his aunt in New York. They decided he would leave the country as soon as possible. She made him promise that he would not leave his house during the weeks that followed. He didn't attend his friend's funeral. It would surely be a step forward for our governments to finally acknowledge the hemispheric dimensions of the problem, acknowledge the connection between such phenomena as the drug wars, gangs in Central America and the United States, the traffic of arms from the United States, the consumption of drugs, and the massive migration of children from the Northern Triangle to the United States through Mexico. No one, or almost no one, from the producers to the consumers, is willing to accept their role in the great theater of devastation of these children's lives. To refer to the situation as a hemispheric war would be a step forward because it would oblige us to rethink the very language surrounding the problem and, in doing so, imagine the potential directions for combined policies. But of course, a war refugee is bad news and an uncomfortable truth for governments because it obliges them to deal with the problem instead of simply removing the illegal, quote-unquote, aliens. One day in court, I tried to explain the phrase de Guatemala a Guatepeor, which means from Guata bad to Guata worse, to a lawyer. In translation, the phrase loses some of its meaning, but it can be glossed this way. Almost 5,000 kilometers separate Tapachula, the Guatemala-Mexico border town, from which La Bestia departs, from New York. Hundreds of thousands of kids have made the journey. Tens of thousands have made it to the border. Thousands to cities like Hempstead. Why did you come to the United States, we ask. They might ask a similar question. Why did we risk our lives to come to this country? Why did they come when, as if in some circular nightmare, they arrive at new schools in their new neighborhoods and find there the very things they were running from? 39. Are you scared to return? In this same conversation, Alina also tells me that she brought the girls over after some pandilleros from the gang that killed Manu's friend started waiting outside her eldest daughter's school every day, following her slowly back home on motorbikes as she walked along the side of the road, trying not to look back. Up until then, the idea of letting the children travel alone with a coyote had been unimaginable. Crossing borders, mounting La Bestia, suddenly the idea of allowing them to stay in Tegucigalpa became even more unimaginable. The beautiful colors of Mexican clothing made out of wool, silk, agave, etc. should not distract you from the ugly colors of immigrating to the U.S. before, during, and after the journey. The preceding quotes are from Valeria Luiselli's book, Tell Me How It Ends, which discusses different aspects of the immigration process through the lens of the questions on a 40-question child intake questionnaire. As an interpreter for child migrants, Luiselli's interactions with a child named Manu illustrate the disconnect between U.S. immigration policy and a semblance of humanity. Imagine learning that someone didn't know what a lawyer was and then subsequently asking if that person had a lawyer. It is abundantly clear that these questions are simply a list and that there is no humanity within the process of appearing in front of an immigration judge. By not fully hearing the stories of these children due to a lack of access to a lawyer, communication gaps, or other obstacles, one side of the process compartmentalizes this suffering and dismisses each case as another addition to a larger statistic. The members on this side of the policy are either oblivious or apathetic to the weaving of this migration thread. The Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir is a lush yet disputed area that is located in the Himalayas. It is part of the larger region of Kashmir that is in dispute between India, Pakistan, and China. However, most of the conflict is based on religious turmoil between Hindus and Muslims and is concentrated in a landmass between India and Pakistan. When these two countries became sovereign states in 1947 following British exit from the region, the Hindu Maharaja of this primarily Muslim state chose for Kashmir to join the primarily Hindu-identifying India instead of the mostly Muslim-identifying Pakistan. In return, India gave this state its own administrative autonomy. This caused the Kashmir territory to become a major point of contention, leading to at least 2 full-scale wars and several proxy wars. In 1989, this conflict escalated even more because of aggressive religious nationalism. As the Kashmiri Valley was mostly populated by Muslims, Hindu people aligned themselves more with the primarily Hindu India and began to feel intimidated by the larger Muslim presence. On the other hand, many Kashmiri Muslims felt alienated from Indian identity and formed their own separatist movement, the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. Some refugees of this conflict, especially Kashmiri Hindus, came to the United States in several waves with relative ease. This only further increased the Muslim majority in this region. Additionally, due to their stereotypical status as a model minority, who usually came to the U.S. on H-1B visas as highly educated skilled workers, these Kashmiri Hindus and their respective migrations were categorized by much more humanity than the other threads we have discussed. Within the Kashmir region itself, almost 100,000 people, mostly Kashmiri Muslims, have died since 1989. Additionally, almost 300,000 people have either been displaced to other parts of India or to special camps with small houses called one-room tenements. These cloth tents are no match for terrestrial elements like rain and wind. With 4 to 5 members of a family cramped into a 10 to 15 square foot area, a common name for these structures is kabutarkhana, or pigeon cage. When families are separated or moved to other parts of India, their host community treats them with a hostility that is analogous to how the United States treats immigrants from Mexico and Central America. As recently as 2019, this conflict has further escalated due to India's even more aggressive lean into Hindu nationalism. The Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019, which targeted the Muslim majority in the region, revoked the special autonomy of the region, locked it down, and even administered a communication blackout which isolated this area from the world. Many Kashmiri Muslim politicians and protesters were placed under house arrest as Indian troops entered the region to enforce its occupation. These troops carried out even further violence as they killed several protesters, burned down houses, and even detained many more Muslim people under the guise of arresting protesters. Today, these detainees are more exposed to the spread of the coronavirus pandemic due to the volume of prisoners the Indian military is rounding up in these prison centers. Once again, we can see how this thread includes the essential othering and quite literal loss of autonomy endured by many of the displaced and migrating people in this region. Come, let us cheer for her, who toils for us all night and day, of whom we take endlessly. Let's make her life more colorful. Let's show her we care. Oh, this evening and now, our dear mother village, with all your children in gaiety, we come to warm and cheer you. Girls not native born, also those of tender youth, merry wives and guests on visit, come partake in common joy and cheer. We go to lands unseen, to places never known, to strange lands unknown, to lands where none have gone. The pods of sesame burst, and the seeds are scattered far. Arrows fly out of view in the different directions shot. From the old stem, from the ancient stalk, as new leaves grow, we too spring again from old stock. Swells full and large, the pods of cotton swell full and large, and burst open. Oh, the girls of Oyo, start picking, continue picking. For the girls of Oyo, they wear to display, the dress to exhibit, worn for all to see, with an elegant sway, swinging to and fro, in the heart of Guman, in the heart of Soyan. With graceful sway, the charming round is done. The lovely maids of Oyo go prettily about. When the brides are sent off, as the brides bid farewell, when the girls as brides are brought, as they leave their own homes, this costume, swinging in grace, will be put on. In Dinyi's festivals, as the maid of Dinyi, the costume of swaying grace will be put on. The costumes will be put on. It, whether it is yarn or weaving, is in fact the very charm of life. Weaving the thread of continuity between the past, the present, and the future, the singers depict the lofty idea of that which changes and that which is constant.